The first chap that I met when I arrived on board Radio Caroline, the Mi Amigo, was a gentleman by the name of Simon D. Carl Henty Dodd is his real name. And he told me he was from Canada, from Ottawa. Well, that got us off on the right footing right away, being a Canadian. And other chaps that I met on board that were employed on Radio Caroline at the time was Doug Carr. I believe he also was a Canadian. There was Gary Kemp, who I believe was a school teacher. There were other disc jockeys like Keith Skews, who had worked for the British Forces Network. And who else? There's... well, those are the three that stick out in my mind. Oh, Tony Blackburn arrived at a later stage. Keith Skews, Tony Blackburn, Gary Kemp, Doug Carr, and Graham Stewart, who later became Bob Stewart. We both started on the South Ship together. And Bob later went north, and consequently, some months later, I went north too.
Well, I hadn't known quite what to expect. I was pleasantly surprised, you know. I mean, you had your own cabin, your little cubicle for your clothes, and, you know, it was, you know, Dutch food. You had to get used to that, a little bit greasy, you know. But it was great. We'd play cards and tell jokes. I mean, Dave Lee Travis was the king of telling jokes. You could give him a subject. He used to challenge us after dinner. Okay, any subject, I'll tell you a joke. And you'd come up with something, he'd say, a shovel. And he'd tell you a joke about a shovel, you know. He was really witty, Dave. I actually went to the South Ship first. There was a vacancy down there, and that's where I started off. And people like Tony Blackburn, Dave Lee Travis, Emperor Roscoe, Robbie Dale were on board. And I found it so exciting. It was just like mid-60s. The whole scene was incredible. Everybody listened to Caroline. I get the impression now, talking to people like Ronan O'Reilly, the truth finally comes out, that they couldn't understand my northern accent, which was pretty broad in those days. But I went off to the North Ship after that. They realised that my place should be up north, and I spent 2 very happy years on Caroline North. The Mick Loves It wedding on board was in fact my idea. We were sitting around just generally chatting. Actually, we were in the captain's cabin. Somebody brought a guitar out and we were having a sing-song, and the captain had access to the wine store. So we were knocking back the Johnny Walker whiskey and having a really good time singing away in the cabin. And the captain suddenly turned around to me and said, "Hey, Tony Prince, why don't you get married on board ship? I have a license. I am the only captain with the group who can actually marry you on board." I said, "You're not kidding, are you?" And he said, "No, I'm serious. I actually have got a license to marry people at sea." And I thought, God, you know, I wish I was courting. That's an incredible scam for publicity. I could see it there and then, you know. And then I suddenly remembered that Mick Loves It was courting Jan Teret, who was Ugly Ray Teret's sister. And he was dead serious. He really wanted to marry her. So I rushed down to his cabin, and he was asleep. And I woke him up, and he was a bit angry. I said, "Hey, Mick, I've got a great idea for you. Get married on board ship." And he told me to get lost, you know, and we went back to sleep. But the next morning, we discussed it more seriously. And he went off for his leave a couple of days later and put it to Jan, and she thought it was a great idea. So that's how the wedding came about.
I, for one, really didn't believe that anything like this would come about. I couldn't see them putting an end to this pop radio scene, pirate pop radio, because it was doing no harm to anyone. And we were not sort of government financed or anything. We were a totally free enterprise. And I thought to myself, the government has a lot more to deal with rather than pirate radio. However, such was not the case. It's amazing just how quickly a bill can be brought into Parliament and passed when life is taken, and such was the case. The sad, tragic affair with Radio City. It seemed that when the late Reg Calvert was shotgunned to death, it was amazing the speed of which the Marine Offences Bill was passed through the British Parliament, and consequently brought a downfall to all the pirate radio stations, bar one, which of course, as you know by now, was Radio Caroline. But I never, until the shooting of Reg Calvert, I never thought that the British government would bring in the government or the Marine Offences Bill. until such time that they were sort of stuck for what to do. But as I say, what with the killing of Reg Calvert, it's amazing just the speed at which the British government put that bill through Parliament.
It never crossed my mind for 1 minute that the government would make pirate radio illegal. Certainly I felt if they did make it illegal, they'd bring us on shore and make it legal. I couldn't believe it. Right to the last day, I thought something's got to happen. The Isle of Man government, we were hopeful that they would, bring in their own rules and regulations that would permit Caroline North to continue. I just could not believe that Harold Wilson would turn against such an incredible public enjoyment, which is what it was.
We were full of idealism. We all thought that Caroline was something very special and should have government recognition at some stage in the future. No one had any idea of what a future broadcasting, land-based broadcasting bill would contain. The only thing we were concerned about at that stage was the oncoming Marine Broadcasting, etc. Offences Act. That did worry us an awful lot, but we all had this feeling that something would come out of it, and it did, in fact. BBC Radio 1 and the ILR and the IBA forming the local radio stations up and down the country in Britain. But I always had a nagging doubt that the government in Britain, especially a Labour government, would go against the popular decision, as they did, in fact.
Well, the government did try to take action, but I think that the Labour Party was in power then, and they knew how popular the pirates were. So the first reading of the Marine Offences Bill was knocked back, and we thought we were safe forever. But then there was a criminal element involved in some of the fort stations, and there was a murder on one of the forts, and that, they had a law and order kick, and you can't really do anything about that. The only reason we survived was because we were good boys, and we took care of business, and we did things illegally but legal. We didn't do stupid things. There was no smuggling came through the ships. There was no everything. But I think those people had different ideas for the ship, or the fort, rather than just a radio station. And obviously with a murder on out there, they had to do something about it.
We were all pretty depressed, and everybody was making plans where to go. It wasn't until, I think, my last 2 weeks on board, which led right up to the bill, that I'd made my mind up that I was going to leave, because I was seriously considering staying on and fighting the elements. I'm glad I didn't now. I actually went on air before I went on my last leave, and I said to the listeners, I'm going to let you decide. If you, as a listener, want me to stay, let's put it to the vote. Drop me a line, and whatever the majority says, I will abide by. I'm in your hands. And it was something like, I think 90% of the letters said, come on shore and make yourself a legal career. On the basis of that, as I said, I'd built up a great relationship with my listeners. I took if it'd been 90% say please stay, I would probably have stayed.
I was quite staggered. I never expected to have a big send-off, but the local Manx people obviously had heard over the local radio and over the main Caroline ship that the disc jockeys were coming off and more DJs were going out there prior to the Marine Offences Act, and they must have known what time the tender was going to leave, because there was hundreds of people all standing around the tender, and it was quite an effort to push our way through. And we had a few young girls who obviously fancied coming out to have a quick look at the ship, and they had to be kind of reluctantly repelled. And we set sail almost instantly, straight out to the MV Caroline. And Dave Williams and Dave Lee Travis, one or two of the other DJs came off, I think a newsreader or somebody. They came off, while myself, Guy Blackmore, and I think it was Mark Sloan eventually turned up. There was three of us anyway, and we took their places and more or less carried on broadcasting from that moment onwards.
Well, first off, Ronan O'Reilly and the head of the Ramsey Customs and a few other officials in the Isle of Man came out and thanked us all for what we did for the Isle of Man, etc., etc. But they left before midnight, before the law became effective, and the last person I spoke to was Ronan O'Reilly. I shook his hand. He went off on the tender with all the officials from the Isle of Man and all the VIPs and that. And as we were approaching midnight, it just was normal programming. I think we closed down for a minute to let people know what dead air was like, and that we were not going to be part of the situation where dead air would prevail on 199. We opened up a minute after 12, and that was it. We call-signed ourselves as Radio Caroline International and Business as Usual, and just kept on going through the night. 24 hours, I believe, that night. And we assured people that we were not going to close down. And that was really it wasn't the 14th, really. It was the end of the month, because we were given a 2-week reprieve. But August the 14th, we just carried on as normal, because the Marine Offences Bill didn't affect us. It only affected the South Ship.
You win! Let's go with Radio Let's Go! Caroline International, the station with the happy difference.
Well, it was your last show. You know, we all went on for half an hour each, I think, and said our farewells, and I made some kind of profound, long speech about why I was leaving and what I felt about the situation. It was a very, very emotional broadcast. It was just very depressing, and then we just waited for the tender to come out. We'd got our suitcase packed, and, saying goodbye to your colleagues who were staying behind. It was all very, very emotional and very depressing. I don't even want to think about it. It was like a hero's welcome, I suppose. Just the very loyal people of the Isle of Man, your friends who you'd made in Ramsey, the little fishing port where we used to dock and stay. We made lots of friends, and they all came out to wish us good luck and everything. And then it was in a car, and off we went down to the capital of the island, Douglas. And as I say, then we all went out on the tiles to kind of drown our sorrows.